My father's house smelled like old newspapers and instant coffee. It always had. Even when I was a child, even before I understood that some homes smell like warmth and others smell like things that have been left too long in closed rooms, I recognized that smell. It was the smell of a man who had stopped opening windows sometime around the year my mother died, which was the same year I was born, which was, according to my father, the same event. I stood in the hallway with a cardboard box in my hands and tried to remember the last time I'd been inside this house. 4 years, maybe 5. We hadn't been close. That's the diplomatic way to say it. The accurate way is that I had spent most of my adult life building as much physical distance between myself and this hallway as geography allowed. And now Robert Walker was dead at 71 from a heart attack. His doctor had been warning him about for a decade, and I was the only one left to clear out the house, because I was the only one there had ever been. Just the two of us, for 38 years. The neighbor who'd called me, Mrs. Patricia Henley, who had lived next door since before I was born and who still sent Christmas cards in envelopes with her return address written in careful cursive, had offered to help. I'd told her no. Whatever was in this house, I didn't want company when I found it. I set the box down on the kitchen table and stood very still. I didn't know what I was waiting for. Permission, maybe, or courage. Or the particular kind of silence that tells you the person who used to fill a space is genuinely, permanently gone and not simply in another room. My father was not in another room. I went to his desk. I need to tell you who I was before I tell you what I found. Not who I am now. Who I was then, at 8 years old, at 12, at 17, so that you understand what certain words can do to a person when they're delivered at the right age, by the right voice, on enough separate occasions to stop being statements and become something closer to truth. My mother's name was Laura Ann Walker née Mercer. I know this from the photograph my father kept on his bedroom dresser, the one I was not supposed to touch, the one in the silver frame that he polished once a year on a specific evening in October when he thought I was asleep. She was 26 in the photograph. She was smiling at whoever was behind the camera with the particular ease of someone who smiled often and meant it. I never met her. She died 3 days after I was born. Complications, my father said. He used that word when I was small before he decided a different explanation was more useful. Complications. I learned later that complications was a word adults used when the truth had too many edges for a child to hold. For the first several years of my life, that word was enough. My mother had died because of complications. I understood death at about the same level I understood electricity. I knew it existed, I knew it had consequences, I didn't know how it worked. It was simply a condition of my life. Other children had mothers. I had a silver-framed photograph and a father who sometimes stood in the kitchen doorway very still, looking at something that wasn't there. I was 8 years old when the explanation changed. It was a Tuesday in November. I remember the month because the heating had been running all day and the house felt airless and close. I had broken a glass, knocked it off the counter reaching for something, and I stood in the kitchen surrounded by the pieces, trying to figure out how to clean them up before my father came in. I wasn't fast enough. He stood in the doorway, looked at the glass, looked at me. I said I was sorry. I said it immediately before he could say anything the way I'd learned to. Sorry? He said the word back to me in a tone that made it sound insufficient. Walked to the cabinet, got the dustpan, didn't say anything else while he swept. I thought it was over. Then he straightened up and looked at me with an expression I didn't have a name for yet. I would come to know it well. It was the look he got when his grief outpaced his control. Your mother would have cleaned that up for you, he said. She would have cleaned up everything for you, but she's not here. I know, I said. Because of you. I didn't understand. I was 8. I stood there with pieces of apology already lined up in my mouth, waiting. She died having you, my father said. The birth, that's what took her. You came into this world and she left it. That's just the truth of it. He went to the sink, rinsed the dustpan, put it away. Left me standing in the kitchen. I didn't cry that night. I'm not sure why. Maybe because I was trying to process something too large for crying. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling and felt, for the first time, the specific weight of existing at someone else's expense. Your mother died having you. You came into this world and she left it. I was 8 years old, and I believed him. The thing about a sentence like that is that it doesn't destroy you all at once. It destroys you gradually. In the specific moments when you're already uncertain, when you've already done something wrong or failed at something or wanted something you couldn't have, it waits for those moments. Then it arrives. I became a careful child. Careful the way that children become careful when they've absorbed the idea that carelessness has consequences beyond the ordinary kind, beyond scraped knees and lost toys. I stopped breaking things. I stopped being loud. I learned to read my father's moods with the precision of someone whose survival depended on accurate prediction. He wasn't violent, I want to be clear about that. He never hit me. He was never cruel in the ways that left visible marks. He simply created a story about who I was and what my existence had cost, and he repeated it with enough consistency that by the time I was 12 it wasn't something he'd told me anymore. It was something I'd become. The boy whose mother died because he was born. That's who I was, not a child who'd lost a parent to tragedy. A child who was himself the tragedy. School helped the way that competence sometimes helps people who feel fundamentally unworthy. If I was excellent at something, I had temporary permission to exist without apology. I studied hard, got good grades. Teachers liked me because I was quiet and diligent and caused no trouble. And I poured myself into that identity the way people pour water into cracked containers, constantly, because it was always draining out. My father came to my graduation. 8th grade, high school, college. He sat in the audience with his hands on his knees, and he clapped when the other parents clapped, and afterward he shook my hand, not hugged, shook, and said well done in the voice he used for things that were technically praiseworthy but didn't touch him. I was 30 years old before I understood that I had been waiting at every single graduation for him to look at me the way my mother looked at whoever was behind that camera. He never did. He looked at me the way he always looked at me, like I was a complicated thing he hadn't figured out how to put down. I moved 4 states away after college. Seattle first, then Portland. I told myself it was career opportunity, which was partially true. I worked in healthcare administration, which is one of those things that sounds boring from the outside and is actually quietly devastating from the inside. The place where the paperwork of illness and loss gets managed by people who learn professionally to process tragedy at arm's length. I was good at arm's length. I had been practicing since I was 8. I called my father on his birthday and at Christmas. We talked about neutral things, the weather, whether the roof on the house needed replacing, whether the Bengals were having a better year. We talked like two people who had agreed without ever discussing it to restrict themselves to the surface of things. Every year on my own birthday I went somewhere alone. A walk usually, coffee somewhere I hadn't been before. Nothing that looked like a celebration. I don't think I made a conscious decision about this. It accumulated. The way things do when you've absorbed the idea, very young, that your birth was a subtraction from the world rather than an addition. I never married. I came close once, a woman named Rachel, 3 years, a conversation about the future that I ended by saying I wasn't ready and meaning something I couldn't fully explain, which was that I wasn't sure I deserved the things she was describing. She was good, kinder than I'd earned. We still exchange emails sometimes, the friendly, careful kind. My therapist, years later, would call what I'd done preemptive withdrawal, the tendency to leave before you could be left. To keep people at a distance that made their eventual departure less catastrophic. I called it being careful. My father called it being like him. He said it once near the end, on the phone maybe 2 years before he died. I'd mentioned that I hadn't seen anyone in a while, a passing thing, the kind of admission you make when you're tired. And he was quiet for a moment and then said, "You got that from me." Not sorry about it, not sad, just an identification. Like a family resemblance. He died on a Wednesday in March. Mrs. Henley found him. She'd noticed the mail accumulating for 2 days and had the sense to call. The hospital called me at 7 in the morning. I booked a flight by 8. I was standing in his hallway by 4 in the afternoon with a cardboard box and no particular idea of what came next. I started in the bedroom. His clothes were folded. Of course they were. Robert Walker had been a precise man, everything in its place. A system for everything. He'd kept the house the same way he'd kept his grief, carefully, consistently, in a way that looked like control but was really just a refusal to let anything change. I worked for 2 hours, filled the box, started another. I was going through the desk in the small room he'd used as a study when I found the folder. It was at the back of the bottom drawer, beneath a layer of utility bills and insurance documents, and the warranty information for a dishwasher he'd bought in 2003. A plain manila folder, the kind you find in any office supply store. No label on the tab. I almost put it in the recycling pile. Something made me open it. Inside were medical documents, printed in the small, dense type of official hospital correspondence. Forms I recognized from my work in healthcare administration. Incident reports, clinical notes, the specific language of medical events that don't resolve the way they're supposed to. I looked at the hospital name on the letterhead, St. Mary's Regional Medical Center. I looked at the date on the first document, October 14th. I knew that date. My birthday was October 11th. I had been 3 days old when this document was created. I sat down on the floor of my father's study with the folder in my hands and started reading. And the world I had built my entire life inside of began, very quietly, to come apart. I didn't read the whole folder that night. I got through 3 pages before I had to stop. Not because the language was technical. I worked in healthcare administration. I knew how to read clinical documentation. But because reading it required me to hold 2 things simultaneously that my mind kept refusing to hold together. The first was the medical information on the page. The second was 30 years of my father's voice. Your mother died having you. I set the folder on the desk and went to the kitchen and stood at the sink running cold water over my wrists the way I'd done since I was a teenager when things became too large for the inside of my chest. A habit my therapist had once noted with careful neutrality. Tell me about that, she'd said. When did you start doing that? I hadn't been able to answer her then. Standing in my dead father's kitchen, I thought I was beginning to understand. I stayed in the house that night. I hadn't planned to. I had a reservation at a motel off the highway, the kind of place with exterior doors and a vending machine in the parking lot, chosen specifically because it had no history with me. But it was past 10 by the time I'd processed enough of what I'd found to function, and the thought of driving felt impossible. I slept in the guest room, not my old room, that door I left closed. In the morning, I made coffee with the can of grounds I found in the cabinet above the stove, the same brand he'd bought for as long as I could remember, and I sat at the kitchen table with the folder and started again from the beginning. The first document was an incident report, St. Mary's Regional Medical Center, dated 3 days after my birth. The language was the careful, passive voice language that medical institutions use when something has gone wrong, and the documentation needs to describe the event without assigning blame prematurely. But I knew how to read between those lines. I had spent 11 years working adjacent to exactly this kind of paperwork. My mother had been administered the wrong dosage of a medication during her postpartum recovery. Not during the birth itself. After. During a period that should have been, by all clinical indications, routine. A nurse had misread a chart. A supervising physician had not caught the error. My mother had experienced a reaction that escalated faster than the floor staff recognized. By the time the correct intervention was administered, the damage was irreversible. She died on October 14th at 4:22 in the afternoon. I was 3 days old. I sat with the document for a long time. The thing I kept returning to wasn't the medical detail. It was the timeline. My mother had survived my birth. She had held me. There was a note in the clinical file from a nurse. A personal notation that someone had added to the official record with the kind of human impulse that bureaucratic forms don't have space for. Mother held infant at 9:15 a.m., October 12th, both stable. Mother asked nurse if baby had her nose. Both stable. October 12th. She had been alive, she had held me. She had asked if I had her nose. And then 2 days later, a medication error had taken her. Not me. Not my birth. Not the fact of my existence. A misread chart. A missed correction. The specific, devastating, ordinary failure of an overwhelmed hospital system on an unremarkable Tuesday afternoon. I pressed the document flat against the table. I thought about every birthday I had spent alone. My father's grief was real. I need to say that, even now. Even after everything I found in that folder. Because the version of events where Robert Walker was simply a cruel man is easier than the truth, and I have spent enough of my life believing easier versions of things to be cautious of them now. He had loved my mother. That much was legible in the house even decades after her death. The photograph on the dresser, polished once a year. The box of her things he kept on the top shelf of his closet. I found it while I was clearing the bedroom. A shoebox. Not the kind that held financial documents, but the kind that held the small physical evidence of a person. A scarf. A birthday card in handwriting I didn't recognize as hers but somehow knew was a single earring that had lost its pair. He had kept a single earring for 30 years. I held it in my palm for a while. Whatever Robert Walker had done to me, he had also been a man who could not throw away one half of a pair of earrings because it was the half he still had. I had not let myself see that before. The grief underneath the cruelty. Not because it wasn't visible, but because when you spend your childhood absorbing someone's pain as though it's your fault, you stop being able to separate the wound from the person who carries it. My father's grief and my father's blame had been so thoroughly fused that I had experienced them as a single thing for 30 years. They were not a single thing. They had never been. Mrs. Henley came by mid-morning. She knocked softly, the way she always had. And when I opened the door, she was holding a plate covered in aluminum foil and looking at me with the expression of a woman who had watched a child grow up through a window and was now seeing him on the other side of something she'd long suspected was coming. "I made too much," she said, which was what she always said. I let her in. We sat at the kitchen table. She had known my mother not well, she said, but the way neighbors know each other in small towns, by sight and brief conversations over fences, by the particular fondness that forms between people who share a street for years. She was lovely, Mrs. Henley said. Very warm, the kind of person you feel immediately. Did you know her long? She and your father moved in maybe 8 months before you were born. So, she paused. Not long. I looked at my coffee. Mrs. Henley, I kept my voice even. After my mother died, do you remember in the weeks after how my father was? She was quiet for a moment. Devastated, she said. That's the only word. It was like watching someone try to operate while one of their essential systems had shut down. He kept doing things, mowing the lawn, taking out the trash, going to work eventually, but it was like, she searched for it, like someone performing the motions of a life. I nodded. He blamed himself, she said. At first, that was my impression. He kept saying if he'd been there, he hadn't been in the room when it happened, he'd stepped out to make a phone call, something ordinary, and when he came back. She stopped. He told me once that he had been gone for 11 minutes, that he'd timed it somehow. 11 minutes. Something shifted in my chest. He timed it, I said. He was not a healthy griever, Daniel. I think you know that. What do you mean he blamed himself at first? She looked at me, something careful in her eyes. Well, she set down her cup. After a while, the way he talked about it changed. He stopped saying I should have been there. He started saying other things. She paused. I assumed he was trying to find a way to carry it. That's what people do. They move the weight around until they find the position that hurts least. And he moved it onto me. She didn't answer, which was its own answer. Did you know that wasn't true? I asked. Did you know my mother didn't die because of the birth? Mrs. Henley looked at the table. I knew something wasn't right about how he explained it, she said. I was there, Daniel. I saw the ambulance. I heard what the paramedics said to each other on the driveway. It wasn't, she stopped. I didn't know the details, but I knew what he told you wasn't the whole truth. I sat very still. Why didn't you say something? She looked at me with an expression that held 30 years of a question she'd clearly asked herself. He was your father, she said, and I was a neighbor, and you were so small, and I kept thinking that eventually he would. She stopped again. I'm sorry, Daniel, I have thought about that for a very long time. I didn't say anything for a while. Outside, a car went slowly down the street. A dog barked somewhere a few blocks away. The ordinary sounds of a Tuesday morning in a small town moving past us without interest. It's not your fault, I said finally, and I meant it completely, without effort. The ease of saying that, the fluency of it, told me something about how long I'd been practicing grace toward everyone except myself. I went back to the folder after she left. The second document was a letter, formal hospital letterhead, addressed to Robert Walker, dated 6 weeks after my mother's death. It was from the hospital's patient advocacy office, the department that exists in every healthcare institution to manage the aftermath of medical errors, to explain, to offer settlement, to use careful language that acknowledges a failure without quite admitting liability. My father had been contacted by the hospital. He had been informed, in the measured prose of institutional accountability, that an internal review had identified a medication administration error as a contributing factor in my mother's death, that the hospital wished to discuss the findings, that they were prepared to offer resources, support, a formal meeting. The letter had been opened. Of course it had been opened. It was in the folder. He had read it. He had read it and he had put it in the back of a drawer beneath utility bills and a dishwasher warranty. And he had gone on telling his son for 30 more years that the boy's birth had killed his mother. I held the letter in breathed. The anger that came was not the hot, reactive kind I might have expected. It was the cold, clarifying kind. The kind that doesn't make you want to throw things. The kind that makes everything very quiet and very sharp. He had known, not suspected, not wondered, known. 6 weeks after my mother's death, when I was an infant, when I was incapable of understanding anything, when there was still time to simply never say the wrong thing, my father had received a letter that told him the truth, and he had filed it away and chosen a different story. I set the letter down, reached back into the folder. There was one more item, a smaller envelope, cream-colored, slightly yellowed at the edges, not hospital stationery. Personal stationery, the kind with a small floral border that women of a certain generation kept in their writing desks for correspondence that mattered. It was addressed to my father in handwriting I recognized from the birthday card in the shoebox. My mother's handwriting. The envelope had been opened, but inside, folded once, was a single sheet of paper that, from the way it sat in the envelope, undisturbed, crease still sharp, had not been unfolded in a very long time. Maybe ever. I held the envelope. My hands were very steady. I don't know why I didn't open it immediately. Some instinct about the weight of what I was holding. Some need to acknowledge before I crossed that particular threshold that on the other side of that fold was something that had been waiting 38 years for me to find it. I set it on the desk, stood up, walked to the window. The oak tree in the front yard was bare. It was March, too early for leaves. And through its branches I could see the gray sky and the empty street and the ordinary Friday morning going on without me outside the glass. My mother had written something. My father had kept it, and either he had read it and understood exactly what he was doing to me for 30 years, or he had never been able to open it. Both possibilities were devastating. I went back to the desk, and I picked up the letter. The paper inside the envelope was thin. Not fragile, it had been preserved well enough, kept dry in a closed drawer in a temperature-controlled house, but thin the way personal stationery is thin, the kind bought for letters that matter, not documents. 2 sides covered in the same handwriting I'd seen on the birthday card. Small, careful, slightly right-leaning. The handwriting of someone who'd been taught cursive properly and had kept the habit. I unfolded it at my father's desk. The date at the top was October 13th. One day before she died. She had written this letter one day before she died. I had to stop reading for a moment, just breathe. Look at the window, at the bare oak tree, at the gray sky, then come back. Robert asterisk, I know you'll say I'm being dramatic. You always say that when I get quiet like this. But I want to write some things down while I'm thinking clearly, because the medication they gave me this afternoon has made everything feel a little far away, and I want to make sure these thoughts exist somewhere outside my head. The baby is beautiful. I know you know that. I watched you hold him this morning, and I know you know that. He has your forehead and I think my mother's mouth, and he makes a sound when he's sleeping that I can't describe except to say it sounds like something that belongs here. Like he was always supposed to be here. I need you to hear me say that. He was always supposed to be here. I've been lying in this bed thinking about all the things I want to teach him. Stupid things, mostly. How to make my grandmother's pie crust. How to parallel park, God knows you can't teach him that. How to apologize properly, not the halfway kind that trails off before it finishes. I have a whole list in my head and it keeps getting longer and I keep thinking I need to write it down before I forget. I'm going to ask the nurse for more paper tomorrow. Robert, I need to ask you something, and I need you to take it seriously even though I know you'll want to dismiss it. If something happens to me, not because I think it will, I think I'm going to be fine, and I think I'm going to go home and make that pie crust and be absolutely insufferable about it, but if something does, please don't let him grow up thinking the world is a hard place. It isn't. It's actually quite soft if you know where to press. And please don't let him think he is a burden. To you or to anyone, he is not a burden. He is the least burdensome thing I have ever seen. He is 3 days old and he already seems very sure of his right to exist, and I want him to keep that. Whatever you do, please let him keep that. I love you, I love him. I love this strange little family we made. I'll see you in the morning. Laura *. I read it twice. Then I folded it very carefully along its original crease and held it in both hands and sat in my dead father's study and did not make a sound for a long time. He is not a burden. Whatever you do, please let him keep that. She had written those words one day before she died. She had asked my father specifically for the one thing he had spent 30 years doing the opposite of. And he had kept the letter. He had kept it in the same folder as the hospital documents, the same folder he'd filed in the back of a drawer beneath 30 years of utility bills. He had kept her words and his knowledge and his settlement paperwork and his grief all together in one manila folder, and he had carried it with him through every year I was alive without ever once opening his mouth. I set the letter down on the desk, very gently, the way you set down things you can't afford to damage further. I called St. Mary's Regional Medical Center the next morning. It took 3 transfers and a 20-minute hold to reach the medical records department. I explained who I was, explained what I was looking for. The woman on the phone, tired, efficient, not unkind, walked me through the process for requesting historical records on a deceased family member. There were forms. There were identification requirements. There was a processing time of 7 to 10 business days. I asked if she could tell me anything from what was already in their system. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I can see that there was an incident report filed in connection with this patient. And I can see that there was a resolution process initiated by our patient advocacy office in November of that year." A pause. "The file was closed in December." "Closed how?" Another pause, longer. "I'm not able to give you specifics over the phone," she said, "but the record indicates a settlement was reached." I thanked her, hung up, sat with that word, settlement. I found it in the folder that afternoon, behind the hospital letter. I don't know how I'd missed it the first time through. Maybe I hadn't been ready for it. Maybe my mind had processed the letter and the incident report and decided it had reached its capacity and simply skipped past the last document without registering it. It was a legal agreement, 2 pages, signed by my father on December 9, 1987, 2 months after my mother's death. Signed by a representative of St. Mary's Regional Medical Center. Notarized. The amount was $180,000. In 1987 dollars, which, accounting for inflation, was a significant sum, enough to pay off the mortgage on this house. Enough to provide real stability for a widowed man raising an infant alone. Enough to represent something the hospital understood to be a genuine acknowledgement of what had happened. My father had signed it. He had accepted the money. He had agreed as part of the settlement standard language. I recognized it from years of adjacent work, not to pursue further legal action. And he had told his son, for 30 years, that his son was the reason his mother was dead. I put the document down, stood up, walked out of the study, walked through the kitchen, through the back door into the yard. It was cold. March in Ohio is still winter in all but name, the ground hard, the sky the specific flat gray that settles over the Midwest in early spring like a lid. I stood on the concrete patio in my socks and didn't feel the cold particularly. Didn't feel much of anything that had a clean name. I thought about what $180,000 would have meant to my father in 1987. I thought about what 30 years of compounding silence had cost me. I thought about a woman in a hospital bed on the night of October 13th, writing a letter by hand, slightly medicated, thinking she would see her husband in the morning, thinking she would go home, thinking she would make pie crust and teach her son to parallel park, thinking she had time. I stood in the yard until my feet went numb. Then I went back inside. I called my therapist from the guest room that evening. Dr. Sandra Acaffer had been my therapist for 6 years. She knew the broad shape of my childhood. She knew about the sentence, "Your mother died having you," and what it had done to the architecture of my interior life. She had spent considerable time helping me understand that a child cannot be responsible for the biological event of their own birth, that guilt assigned by a grieving parent is not the same as guilt earned, that the story I'd been given was not the same as the truth. She had been working for 6 years with incomplete information. "Daniel," her voice when she answered was careful the way it always was when I called outside of scheduled hours. "What's happened?" I told her. Not all of it, not the letter, not yet, that felt too new to speak out loud. But the folder, the incident report, the settlement. She was quiet for a long moment after I finished. "How are you feeling right now?" she said. I thought about it seriously. The way she'd taught me to, not the reflexive asterisk fine but the actual inventory. Like someone showed me the foundation of a building I've lived in my whole life, I said. And the foundation was wrong. And now I'm standing in the building trying to figure out which walls are still load-bearing. That's a precise description. It doesn't feel like enough of one. "No," she said, "it wouldn't." A pause. "Daniel, I want to ask you something and I want you to take your time with it. What do you feel toward your father right now?" I looked at the ceiling of the guest room, the same ceiling I'd looked at as a child on visits, trying to make myself small enough to be easy to have around. I started, stopped, tried again. "I feel the way you feel when you've been carrying something very heavy for a very long time," I said, "and someone tells you that you could have put it down at any point, that it was never yours to carry. And you have to figure out whether to be relieved that you know or furious that you didn't know sooner. And which one is winning right now?" I didn't answer immediately. Outside the guest room window, the oak tree moved in a wind I couldn't hear through the glass. Bare branches crossing each other against the gray sky, the same pattern I'd watched from this room as a child, wondering what I needed to become to be worth keeping. "Neither," I said. "Right now it's just very quiet." She told me to call her tomorrow, to eat something, to be careful driving if I went anywhere tonight. I said I would. After I hung up, I sat on the edge of the bed for a while. Then I went back to the study. I picked up my mother's letter, and I read it one more time. Not the whole thing, just the last part. The part I'd been carrying around inside my chest since the afternoon before, turning it over like something found on a beach whose origin you can't quite place but whose weight feels exactly right in your hand. "He is not a burden. He is the least burdensome thing I have ever seen. Whatever you do, please let him keep that." I folded the letter, put it in my jacket pocket, closest to my chest, where it should have been 38 years ago. I left the house on a Friday morning. Not permanently, there was still work to be done, things to sort and donate and arrange with the estate attorney. But I needed a day away from those walls, from the smell of instant coffee and closed rooms, from the specific weight of a space that had held 30 years of a secret I'd been living inside without knowing. I drove to the cemetery before I drove anywhere else. I don't know why I hadn't gone sooner. Maybe because I'd always approached my mother's grave the way I approached everything connected to her, with the low-grade guilt of someone who believes their presence at a memorial is an intrusion rather than a right. I had been to the cemetery exactly twice as an adult, both times with my father, both times standing slightly behind him, slightly to the side, in the position of someone who understands they are tolerated at an event rather than invited to it. This time I went alone. It was early. The cemetery was empty except for a groundskeeper working at the far end of the property, too distant to be anything more than a shape moving slowly between the stones. The grass was still winter pale, just beginning to consider green at the roots. My breath came out in small clouds. Her stone was simple. Laura Ann Walker, 1961-1987, beloved wife and mother. I stood in front of it for a long time. The groundskeeper's equipment hummed distantly. A bird moved through the bare tree above me without stopping. The morning was very still in the specific way that early spring mornings are still. Not the stillness of warmth, but the stillness of a world that hasn't fully started yet. I put my hand in my jacket pocket. My mother's letter was there. I'd kept it on me since the night before, carried it through sleep and waking the way you carry something you're not ready to put down yet. "I found your letter," I said. My voice sounded strange out loud, too loud for the space, and then, after a moment, exactly right. "I found the hospital records too, and the settlement." I stopped. "I know what happened to you. I know it wasn't the birth. I know it wasn't me." The stone said nothing. Of course it didn't. But the saying of it mattered. I understood that now in a way I couldn't have explained to anyone who hadn't spent 38 years swallowing a sentence whole and letting it live in their chest like something with roots. "I don't know why he did it," I said. "I've been trying to understand it since I found the folder, and I can't build a version of the logic that makes it make sense, even accounting for grief, even accounting for the fact that he was a broken person who just lost the thing that mattered most to him." I stopped. "I know he loved you. I could see it in how he kept your things. I think losing you destroyed something in him that never came back. I think he needed somewhere to put that destruction, and I was the only available place." A car passed on the road outside the cemetery gates, slowed at the turn, then continued. "That doesn't make it okay," I said. "I'm not standing here saying it makes it okay. I'm 38 years old and I have spent my entire life believing I wasn't supposed to be here. Do you understand what that does to a person? Not as a thought, not as an occasional dark feeling, but as a foundational belief, as the ground under everything." My voice stayed even. I'd learned a long time ago to keep my voice even. I never let anyone get close enough to matter because I was certain that eventually they'd reach the same conclusion he had, that my existence was a debt I couldn't repay. The groundskeeper's equipment went quiet somewhere in the distance. I looked at the dates on the stone. 1961 to 1987. 26 years. She had been 26 years old. She had wanted to teach me to make pie crust. "He kept your letter," I said. "I want you to know that. He kept every piece of you he could find. There was a single earring in a shoebox in his closet. He kept one earring for 30 years because he couldn't throw away the half he still had." I felt something move through my chest. He was not a simple man. He was not a simple anything. He was a person who loved you so much that losing you broke his ability to be a father, and he made me pay for that, and I don't know yet how I'm going to carry both of those things at once, but I'm going to have to learn. I took my mother's letter out of my pocket, unfolded it one more time, read the last lines to her, standing at her grave in the pale March morning, my voice quiet and my hands steady. "He is not a burden. He is the least burdensome thing I have ever seen. He is 3 days old and he already seems very sure of his right to exist, and I want him to keep that. Whatever you do, please let him keep that." I folded the letter. "I'm going to try," I said. The estate took 3 months to finalize. I made 6 more trips to the house over that period. Sorted, donated, arranged. Spoke to the attorney. Signed the paperwork. Made the decisions that need to be made when a person's life has to be converted into a series of practical transactions. Mrs. Henley came by on the last day. We stood on the front porch in early June sunshine, the oak tree finally in full leaf above us, and she held a mug of tea she'd brought from her own kitchen and looked at the house with the expression of someone watching something end. "What will you do with it?" she asked. "Sell it," I said, "I think." She nodded, didn't try to talk me out of it. "He wasn't a bad man," she said, after a while, carefully. "I want you to know I'm not saying that to excuse anything, he wasn't simple." "I know," I said. "He talked about you sometimes, in the last few years." She looked at her mug. "He said you'd turned out well. He said it the way people say things they're proud of but can't figure out how to say directly." She paused. "He asked me once if I thought you were happy." Something tightened briefly in my chest. "What did you tell him?" I said I didn't know, that I hoped so. She looked at me. "Are you?" I thought about the question, with the seriousness it deserved. "I'm getting there," I said, which was the most honest answer I'd given to that question in 38 years. I started seeing Dr. Acaffer twice a week after I got back to Portland. We went back through everything with the new information, not to relitigate it, not to rebuild the case against my father, but to do the slower and more demanding work of dismantling what 30 years of a false story had constructed inside me. The reflexive apologies, the preemptive withdrawal, the specific loneliness of a person who believes, below the level of conscious thought, that their presence in any given space is a subtraction. It was not fast work. I don't want to suggest it was fast. That would be the wrong kind of ending, the kind where revelation is the same as healing, where knowing the truth collapses the distance between who you were and who you're becoming. It doesn't work like that. The truth was the beginning, not the conclusion. The actual work was slower and less cinematic and happened mostly in a small office on Tuesday and Thursday afternoons. But it was work I was doing now with the correct materials. That was different. That was everything. My birthday is October 11th. This past October, I turned 39. I didn't go somewhere alone. I called Rachel not to revisit anything. We were long past that and both of us knew it. But because she was someone who had once tried to offer me warmth and I had refused it, and I wanted her to know, without making it into more than it was, that I understood now what I hadn't understood then. She laughed when I told her why I was calling, not unkindly. "Daniel," she said, "you were always allowed to call me." "I know that now," I said. We talked for an hour, about nothing important, about her new job and my work and a book we'd both apparently read in the same month without knowing it. Ordinary conversation. The kind that sounds like nothing and means a great deal. After I hung up, I made dinner. An actual dinner, not the functional eating I'd done for years, something with multiple components, something that took time. I opened a bottle of wine, sat at my kitchen table as the evening came in through the windows. I thought about my mother, not with guilt, not with the familiar weight of a debt I'd never chosen and couldn't repay, just with the ordinary, uncomplicated grief of someone who lost a person before they had the chance to know them. The grief that belonged to me by right and that I'd never been allowed to feel cleanly because it had always been tangled up with the other thing, the false thing, the sentence my father had built his pain inside of. She had wanted to teach me to make pie crust. She had asked if I had her nose. She had been 26 years old and she had loved me for 3 days, and she had written down, in her careful right-leaning cursive, that I seemed very sure of my right to exist. I hadn't been. For most of my life I hadn't been. But I was working on it. I raised my glass to the window, to the evening, to no one in particular and someone specific simultaneously. Then I drank and stayed at the table and let the birthday simply be what it was. A day I was born and a woman loved me, and I was not a tragedy. I was never a tragedy. I was only ever a child who deserved better than the story he was given. And it was not too late, it had never been too late, to put that story down and finally, carefully, begin to write my own.